The United Nations Statistical Commission recommends that countries should rebase their GDP every 5 years to reflect more updated economic conditions. In Nigeria, the last rebasing exercise was done in 2014. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics is preparing to rebase the GDP and the Consumer Price Index. While we have an economist in the studio, Dr. Paul Alaje, for his perspectives on the rebasing of these economic indicators. You're welcome to Business Express Talk.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Now, Nigeria's gross domestic product grew by 2.98% in the first quarter of 2024, lower than 3.46% in the last quarter. Did you expect this growth, and what could be responsible?
Okay, thank you. We have a positive growth, even though it's a more slower growth than what we had in the last quarter. As to expectation, the answer will be a yes, because when you look at the overall performance in the economy, we have seen inflation. So when you are talking for real growth, you have to make provision for high inflation. So inflation is taking significant part of that growth that we would have had. So we're not completely surprised as to having relatively lower than 3% GDP growth rate for the first quarter of 2024.
Okay, the services sector topped the list. What is happening to the agri sector?
Well, agri sector and manufacturing sector usually have setback. And when you look at by what agri sector grew, it was really very marginal. And the reasons are obvious. We still have relative insecurity around our farms and food production zones. We still have relative concerns around logistics, which are what many of us have mentioned that we need to improve. We have also seen relative insufficiency in what is happening around agriculture. The right way to measure this will be what is happening to food scarcity. Well, maybe the word should not be scarcity, but pricing. You would agree with me that Bureau of Statistics just last week had reported that food inflation has grown by over 40% year on year. So that tells us that we really need to do something very quickly about food import and also do something about food production. For me, I think what we need to do will be to boost food supply. And in boosting it, it means we have to invest more in agriculture, support farmers, make sure that others around our farmers going back to their farms are cleared, and logistics and supply chain of food item is also taken away very quickly so that it doesn't dig deeper into our growth numbers.
Now, the MBS is making plans to rebase Nigeria's GDP and CPI. Why GDP rebasing, and why now?
Okay, so it's advisable, though not compulsory, for nations to rebase their GDP, that's domestic gross product. We measure the quantity or the measure of total economic activity, which is exchange of goods and services within an economy, using money as a measure of value, which averagely within a year. It's important to measure those items. You know, MBS felt that there are some items that are not in the basket, and it's important for them to add them so that they are properly measured. And of course, if they are adding more items, it means that more volume will go up. It also means that these items that are not measured, they may relatively move away from informal sector that are largely unmeasured to relative formal sector, trying to formalize the sector and be able to capture it as part of the item that is contributing to the Nigeria's economy. And I will tell you that we have a large, maybe I should not call it robust, we have a large informal sector. How we formalize this informal sector will also determine what the size of our GDP will be. Therefore, it's important for us to rebase, but rebasing has its own concern. Recall that from the last time we rebased, I think it's only once, that's 10 years ago, it's only once that we grew more than 5% GDP. And to grow more than 4% GDP, it was really few. I think 7% one, 5% one, and 4% maybe one or two. The remaining have been between minus to 0 to less than 1 to 2 and to 3. So unlike when we were growing 7, 6, 7 consistently like that, the moment we say that we rebase, it means that the size of our economy will grow. And it's possible that we now win back our size as the largest economy or second largest economy in Africa after this rebasing. So is it a welcome development? The answer is yes. But do we need to do it with a caution? I will tell you also yes. So it has benefit because investors will feel there is confidence, the GDP of the country is strong, let's put our money in it because we know it will not suddenly disappear. That's one of the benefits. A concern here is that if government must borrow, in Nigeria, the tradition and culture is to use GDP as a yardstick for measuring what the government debt profile should be. And if you are looking at 35-40% GDP, debt to GDP ratio, it will mean that when we rebase and our economy suddenly becomes maybe 150% plus what we have, it also means that what government has in debt in relative to GDP may significantly reduce. What does that mean? There is more room for us to borrow. But this is what we need to look at. In economics, there is necessary condition and there is sufficient condition. In taking such decision, I want to task the executive and legislature, especially the National Assembly, to consider what will be the implication of debt service versus revenue of government. Because already we are doing each amount, and this is what takes the larger chunk of our revenue. Therefore, as much as we want to rebase, we need to look at some hurdles that may come and challenges that may give us as an economy.
Do you see Nigeria being able to rebase in line with global best practices?
Yes, I've seen us try to do that once, and even though it was not a perfect, but it was not a bad show. And I also believe that with the current leadership of the National Bureau of Statistics and the energy that has been displayed, I was even at the event yesterday by myself, and I've seen the sincerity, data they put forward, argument they put forward, properly speaking. I think it's something that worth it. And I believe that they can achieve this feat. Okay,
the Consumer Price Index is also to be reviewed. What other areas and indicators should the NPS be looking at?
Well, I think that we need to look at the methodology and foods in the basket for the Consumer Price Index. If you say that inflation year on year is 33.9%, I tell you a lot of people are disagreeing because when they go to the market is telling them opposite of what they are getting. I know we are looking at averages, and average for you may not be average for another person, but the economic concerns, economic crisis that people are faced with, especially as measured by inflation, it's very critical. So I would want authorities to look at that. I know we also have labor data, which seems to be very confusing. Yeah, the Bureau of Statistics has been very clear to say that we are not saying unemployment in Nigeria reduced to 4%. That's not what we are saying. We are saying that people who cannot get job up to 1 hour in this economy, it is 5.2%. Those who cannot get in. So I want Bureau of Statistics to actually make this more obvious so that people will stop thinking that the Bureau of Statistics is not an appendage of government.
Now, it is our hope that the output of the rebasing will satisfy the needs of all users and reflect a better picture and understanding of our economy. But what economic activities should we be paying attention to as a country to boost GDP?
Now, we need to look at what is happening online. Most of the online transaction should be there. We also need to look at the creative industry, even though that has been captured. But I can tell you that Nigeria is exporting so much creative out of other countries. Some of our musicians, from Davido to Olamide to name it, MI, their music are everywhere all around the world. But what is the value, the contribution of what they are getting around the world? They're either getting nothing or nobody even recognize all that they are doing, but in Nigeria, I mean, when you go outside Nigeria, you see so much interest in some of the things they are doing. Can we reform that system such that this is what we are exporting and is giving us little or nothing as a nation? Even though the people that sang or the artists themselves will get the value, but because they are Nigeria, we have implication on our foreign reserve. Two, it also have implication on our GDP and net implication from our net income from abroad. And I think authority we need to look at, to look critically into that sector, predominantly young people who have energy, who need little or no support of government, but government must be present to support them. If they can do this much without government intervention, imagine when government intervenes in what they are doing. I think they can take over the world.
Beyond the rebasing, what other structural reforms are needed to strengthen Nigeria's statistical systems and economic data management capabilities?
Well, I think methodology is for me, and also the sample size. The sample size we look at, sometimes you see about 600 households in a state, even though there has been argument that if you want to stay soup, you only take a portion. You don't swallow the whole soup. But I must also tell you that if you don't let the spoon touch the spoon enough, you may just be touching the oil. are not where the soup is, because that has been the argument from statisticians and economists. For us as economists, we need to have a meaningful sample size so that it's representative. I want to believe it will be random sampling, which of course the Bureau of Statistics have said yes they are doing, but the samples must be sizable enough to represent the entire population. I think if they get the sample size correctly, I think that would be nice. But sample size from data may be just too small, to my mind, and even what literature has said regarding what we should be looking at. We cannot use 600 persons in a state and say that will represent the entire state. 600 households, I don't think so. How many households do we have in a state? For instance, FCT randomly selecting 600 people, yeah, may be accepted, but may not be sufficient. I think we need to expand the sample size. Then we look at a standard error of what has happened. Maybe we are looking at 2%, 3%. At what point will it be significant enough? So I think that Bureau of Statistics may need to, in the coming period, look at that. And if you are saying you want more sample size, then we must be ready to fund them. And though I'm not the spokesperson of the National Bureau of Statistics, but I think we need to do more in funding that agency if truly we want to move towards the path of development.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul Alaje, for joining us on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Moving on.